I'm not the smartest. I didn't invent anything. I didn't come up with a new way of doing something. I've repeated industries that already existed that were extremely competitive. My asset was, like you said, perseverance, consistency, discipline, effort, and not giving up. And sooner or later, I outworked others in similar ways, in similar industries. So that was my asset, and I had to use it. We should all look at ourselves, understand what it is that my strengths and my weaknesses are, and let me focus on those and make something out of them.
I'm with a really interesting and unique entrepreneur, Jose. It's such a pleasure to have you, and I can't wait to talk about all the amazing ups and downs of your entrepreneurial life.
Lawrence, it is great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to have this discussion.
Well, Jose, I'd love to start with the accident you had at 4 years old, because I feel like it set the theme for your incredible mindset of resilience. And I know you had a really bad accident at such a young age. You know, my son's about to turn 4, so I can't imagine how tough that was for your parents. But I'd love to maybe start there, and then we can kind of move on.
I cannot imagine. My kids are 9. I have twins, boy and a girl, and I cannot imagine what my parents went through. They were young at the time. I had young parents. I'm a little bit of an older parent now. I waited a little longer than they did. So they had me in their early 20s. And although I had some serious consequences and a lot of suffering, I can only imagine what they went through. It was a very traumatizing situation that I wouldn't hope on anybody in this world. It was very tragic, and it changed the course of my life, the course of their life. So there is so much to it, but it truly changed the entire course of the rest of my life in so many ways that sometimes I am curious of how my life would have turned out without that event that occurred when I was 4. And it forced me to grow up right away. So that was perhaps one of the initial impacts. It snapped me out of childhood. It woke me up. It skipped the rest of my childhood. It eliminated it in many, many ways. And I had to grow up overnight. So I often say that I wish I was half the man that I was when I was 4. As I've grown up and gotten older and faced other things throughout my life and become more mundane and become more perhaps materialistic and more attached to the surroundings that I live in. When I was a child, I think of me, and that little guy gives me a lot of strength because I was wiser, I was deeper. I think that it just hit me. And I was one of those personalities that I was able to understand what was going on, absorb the impact, and live with it, and overcome the sequence of events that occurred after that. So that's the initial phase.
So what actually happened? What was the accident?
Well, it was a bus accident. It was on one of those public transportations. We were traveling from one town to another in the northern region of Mexico. It was at nighttime. This is back in the early 70s. Poor visibility, bad safety. There were not even seatbelts. The bus was very different circumstances. The roads were two-way roads, curves, mountainy. And another bus, actually a petroleum carrying bus coming the opposite way was passing and ran right into us. So the bus crashed, it exploded, and only a handful of people survived. Actually, I rarely talk about this, not because it bothers me, not because it affects me to discuss it. It just, the subject rarely comes up nowadays in my adulthood. Few people ask me about it, and I never offer the information. So it's always interesting for me to talk about it, but it's something that I think fewer people in my circle even know the circumstances. They don't really know exactly what happened, but yeah, it was essentially just a bus accident on the road where the majority died. Like I said, a handful of people survived. I was one of them. The few out of the few that survived and were taken to the nearest hospital, most of them died too. So it was a very, very tragic, very dramatic accident where I was perhaps one of the few survivors, and I got very lucky. Some say that I was just a very healthy boy. I was very strong. They kept telling my parents just to prepare themselves because they wouldn't give me more than a few hours just because of the shock. I effectively died, cardiac arrest and the impact that your body has to take when you're burned 100% and close to 80% in third-degree burns. So they did whatever, and somehow 1 hour at a time, they kept keeping me alive. One of the problems was that they didn't know the internal aspects of my accident, so they couldn't feed me through my mouth. I had to be fed through an IV for subsequent weeks to months, perhaps. And I spent close to a year in intensive care initially. So that was the, and one of the things that I'm very proud of, and again, that I look back and I go, wow, I wish I had the strength now that I had when I was a little boy, because looking back, I took this very well. My father, one of the stories that, again, very few people know in my life, my father looked at me, explained to me what had happened. And from that point on, this is very interesting. I never cried again. Never cried. Nowadays you see all these little kids that are crying over everything because of a toy, because they tripped, because you told them something the wrong way, because of this, because of that. From that point on, I never cried again. It's like I'm emotionally constipated. I was given an instruction to be strong and to be able to maneuver through this and to be able to tolerate what was coming. And it recorded in my brain so well that from that point on, I was strong and I was ready for it. So those were some of the initial, and that's essentially what that accident was. Of course, there were a number of steps, not just the initial recovery, because the early stages, of course, you are in intensive care. They're just trying to keep you alive. Once that process starts stabilizing, there comes the second stage, which is reconstructive. That lasted for a good decade from the time I was, of course, the first year I was in intensive care until I was 5 years of age or so. And then the subsequent 10 years, I was in and out of the hospital every 2 or 3 months, having a surgery, skin grafts, finger reconstructions, neck, face, ear, this and that, my back, because as you're growing, your skin starts stretching. Yes. Burned skin does not stretch similarly. So that was a process of the combination of the physical pain, the recovery, the constant ins and out of the hospital, the therapies, but also the even harder was going in and out of school, interrupting my studies, changing schools, getting into a new environment every time I got into a new school for one reason or another, because we kept changing neighborhoods, so on and so forth. The mental difficulties perhaps were tougher than the physical ones. This is something that I learned and that I talk to other people about. If you don't develop that strength to deal with these type of circumstances, they are much more impactful, perhaps, than physical scars and in physical pain. So that lasted for years and went on and on. And I think, we'll skip all that because there's thousands and thousands of stories that went on throughout that period of time. But if we have to narrow down, that was really the event that changed the course of my life. From that point on, I'm going to pivot a little bit into a very interesting subject, which is how did it impact my personality? From that point on, being someone who was, I think I was born more of an introvert type of personality, quiet, shy, not so social in general terms. After this event, little by little, I saw the need for me to become more social because I had to earn the acceptance of people. This is where a lot of personalities don't understand that sometimes you have to adjust and make an effort, make a change to belong, to participate, to improve yourself, to improve your social environment, and to become who you want to become. I felt constantly rejected. I felt constantly verbally abused, mentally abused, ridiculized, people making fun of me. But sooner or later, I developed an ability to make friends, to get along with others, to make people like me for who I am and look beyond what they were looking at. And sooner or later, I created this personality that eventually turned into a very social / business oriented. The reason why I'm telling this story is because I attribute a lot of this to my entrepreneurial aspects of my career and my life. This event opened the doors. It forced me to turn into someone else that had to earn everything from someone liking me, from someone understanding me, from someone talking to me, and getting the world around me to participate and interact with me in a different way. So from that point on, my personality started adjusting. And that's why I said earlier, I don't know who I would have been or how I would have turned out had this event not occurred in my life. So you never know. But sometimes a very dramatic experience can eventually have a positive effect. At the time, it doesn't appear to be that way. It never does. But sometimes horrible things eventually bring something positive to your life, and you just have to wait and see.
Well, Jose, as you know, we're both slightly older parents, and that's such an interesting concept, what you just said, because at the time, no one would wish the hell that you went through on their boy, but it made you the man you are today. And it has, in the long term, in the long arc of your life, it was actually a very positive thing. And I think that's such a refreshing message to share, because anyone going through hardship, it might be the worst thing today, but you never know. In 5 years, it could be the best thing that happened to you. And I'll give the easy example. If you're in a terrible marriage and you go through an awful divorce, of course, it absolutely sucks. But maybe in 5 years, when you're with someone much more compatible, you'll be so glad that happened. And it's the same with so many different things. I can look back at my own life, and a lot of the business failures at the time were just awful, but they led me to who I am today. And I'm very happy today. So I guess in that lens, I'm very happy they happened. But you said something really interesting, because you said something about being a natural introvert. There's a book by Susan Cain, I think it's called Calm, and she talks about how the world is basically, she's a very introverted woman. She talks about how the world is basically set up for extroverts to succeed. And when you were talking, it reminded me of when you're a kid in school, of course, the extroverts are going to make friends easier, and it's going to be much more acceptable. You know, a lot of kids are boisterous and loud. And then in the same in business, you know, if you're very introverted and you don't go out and meet people, it's going to be harder to find opportunities. It's going to be harder for people to relate to you. So that's so interesting that you had that natural inclination and you really evolved through your situation to become more extroverted. And I feel like it's exactly the same with me, because if I look back at my life, I was a very introverted kid too, but I got into trading, and I was this young, in my early 20s, I was in a trading pit, and I had to like fight for every trade with a bunch of guys in their mid 30s, a lot older than me, more experienced than me. And that forced me to really come out of my shell. And that's served me so well, you know, because if I'd been very introverted, maybe I wouldn't have half the business opportunities that I've had now. Maybe I wouldn't have met my wife. You know, it's so many things come from forcing yourself to be more extroverted. So that's such an interesting thing. I never thought about that before, but much of the Western world is set up for extroverts to succeed.
I agree with that completely. And we underestimate not just entrepreneurship, the business world in general, the world in general is a tough environment for everyone. It's aggressive, it's difficult, it's competitive, it's the law of the fittest. And if you are an extrovert or an introvert, whatever it is that you are, you have to understand that in order to get somewhere, you need to be fair, but you need to be tough, and you need to develop certain skills that will get you there. It doesn't happen by itself. It's very rare when things happen the way that you intended them or the way you planned them without a huge amount of effort. So it is for everyone. And some of us tend to think that things are particularly difficult just for us. We tend to think that our particular circumstances were tougher than everybody else. And no, in reality, most of us have it very tough. The only difference is a few of us are able to put up with that pain and understand what needs to be done and go for it and experience that level of perhaps adjustment and the level of toughness that it's required to succeed in business. And some people just walk away from it and just decide that, hey, this is not for me. This is not my personality, and they give up. Some of us continue pursuing. We maintain that persistence, that perseverance in pursuing our dreams in whatever it is that we want. And others just walk away from them at some point. I think that's the biggest difference between achievement and mediocrity is the level of effort and your willingness to put up with what's necessary to get there. So that's all it is. It's to just keep going and trying and trying. And sometimes, at some point, the stars align in your favor. But it takes many, many attempts. And the other point, which I also agree, where although in the present, when something goes wrong, it feels horrible, it's unexplainable, it's very impacting to most of us, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a negative event in your life, whether it's an accident, whether it's financial, whether it's a failed business, or even a bad day or a bad week. They're horrible at the moment. But if you move on and not give up, a lot of those experiences start coming together and they start having a different meaning in the future. They somehow, their meaning converts to something more positive down the road. But it is very difficult to see it in the present. So, and very understandable. Nobody enjoys bad experiences. Who does? I mean, nobody wants a bad day, or nobody wants to lose a business or a lot of money, or have a breakup, or have a bad personal experience. But when you look back, like you said, eventually, wow, you might think of it as one of the best things that could have happened to you. It just takes time to really look back and understand the benefits.
I'm so glad you mentioned the idea of perseverance, tenacity, grit, because I think if I look back at anything I'm proud of, it never came easy, and I wasn't naturally good at it, but I got to some level of success through perseverance. So I think that's, we all have different amounts of natural abilities, but we can all persevere. That's something that we can all do. So that's such an inspiring message for you, because can we maybe talk a little bit about your background? Because I know you've been very successful in 4 different fields of entrepreneurship, which I find so interesting. It's hard enough to reach the top of one mountaintop, and you've done it 4 times in 4 different industries, which I think is just incredible. Can you talk a little bit about that journey, and also was it you're curious about different things, or how come you kept pivoting to different industries as opposed to staying in the same field like most people do?
Well, there were a number of reasons. And by the way, although there were 4 important segments of my career where I became somewhat successful, there were many other attempts. There were many other failed businesses. They weren't just 4. There were a couple of dozen failed businesses, opportunities, years of my life where I invested in something that went absolutely nowhere. I'll start by saying everybody is motivated by different things. Some people are motivated by success, by achievement, by accomplishments, by money, by recognition, by belonging, by being a part of a mission. That whatever your mission is, perhaps it's to help your family, to help society. Whatever that mission, you need to use it to give you the strength to get somewhere. I always tell people that you don't need to have the same drive. You can have different circumstances, different requirements in your personality that will allow you to get somewhere. And you can also have different assets. Perhaps some people are very smart, some people are very organized, some people are very persistent. I don't consider myself one of the most qualified people. I'm not the smartest. I didn't invent anything. I didn't come up with a new way of doing something. I've repeated industries that already existed that were extremely competitive. My asset was, like you said, persevere, consistency, discipline, effort, and not giving up. And sooner or later, I outworked others in similar ways, in similar industries. So that was my asset, and I had to use it. So we should all look at ourselves, understand what it is that my strengths and my weaknesses are, and let me focus on those and make something out of them. And understand that we don't have to have everything to succeed. You don't have to be brilliant. I was not a straight A student. I was a horrible student. I barely made it. I just wanted to have my degrees and have an education. But I have horrible memory. I have horrible retention. I'm ADD. I'm distracted. I'm a daydreamer. I have anxiety. I have dyslexia. You name it, I have it. And I still managed to turn my life into something, just by trying and knowing that it was possible. Another one of my drivers between you and I is that I always, since I was little, I like nice things. I'm not embarrassed to say. I always love traveling, cars, clothing, nice hotels, first class, great food. I love good things. But here's the fun part and the interesting part. I knew that no one was going to give it to me. This is where reality and myth, reality and imagination need to come together, and honesty, because some people do not match their effort with their expectations. They want things to happen without applying the effort. I knew that it was going to take effort and sacrifice. I knew that I liked nice things, and I understood very clearly that nobody was going to give me anything for free from a very young age. Nobody would. And I began to take action to start achieving and obtaining some of the things that I liked. I'm one of those people that, because we now in the world of social media, we see that everyone is trying to be someone that they're not.
Yes.
I've attributed myself to be one of the opposite personalities, where I am more ashamed or embarrassed of showing some of the things that I like. I'm not trying to show off where I go, where I travel, what I own, what I bought, where I live, because I'm shy in that respect. I'm not trying to show anyone who I am or what I have. But the fact is that I enjoy them. I have those things for me because I like them, not because I want others to know that I have them. And that's a very big distinction. And the point that I'm getting to is that has been one of my motivators. I want to give great things to my family. I want to live nicely because I enjoy it. And it's great. So that wakes me up in the morning, and everybody needs to have a reason to do that and use that strength to allow you to get somewhere. So my failures have been endless. I'm going to tell you that even as we speak, I'm going through a very difficult time with my business because of interest rates, because of the economic situation, the financial situation, the political circumstances, so on and so forth, that we won't get into. But even as we speak, I'm going through incredibly tough times in my business. We have a lot of commercial properties with floating interest rates, and we have a lot of developments with very high interest rates, and our consumers are being affected. So even today, I'm still struggling with some of these things. And my businesses have never been easy. They've never just been stable or smooth. So I've had to constantly fight and improve and perfect and continue this battle. It never ends. It just keeps going. When I started, without getting into too much detail, but because I've participated in a lot of industries, one of my blessings, but it's also a curse, is that I'm not really in love with any one given product or one industry. I just love entrepreneurship. I love the process of starting businesses, building businesses, doesn't matter what they are. So I've participated, I've gotten involved in many of them. And I've developed the ability to understand how to run them. Once you understand the product, the service, the standards, the particular aspects of any given industry, and if you understand numbers, you can grab a set of financials and a balance sheet and transport it to any industry and be able to relatively comfortable operate a business in any of these different industries. So when I started, I wasn't necessarily just looking to be in one particular niche market. And when mine failed, I'm going to answer now the question of the initial industry, which was an exporting company of machinery for the oil and gas and petrochemical. I was a broker, and that industry became obsolete with the internet, with international trade centers, with exclusive distributorships, where all of these organizations around the world started setting up their own offices in Mexico and Central America. Keep in mind that when I started my first company, there was no internet, there was no fax. I had a telex. Imagine that. My first business, I didn't even have a fax or cell phones or any of that. So technology moved so fast, and I perhaps wasn't smart enough. I was young and inexperienced to really adapt my business quick enough to be able to pivot. And that forced me to start another business in a completely different arena and start looking for opportunities. It's incredible. And I don't even know how it happened. They say that your first million is the toughest one to make, and it's almost impossible. So I've managed to somehow do that 4 times, where I started literally from zero, where I had nothing again. I lost what I had, savings, lines of credit, industry that I was in. And the second time I started trying trial and error in different things, until I ended up in the restaurant business. I ended up in partnering, contributing my time in another business, where eventually I became a partner, grew the business. Then we had another collapse, and that industry changed completely, where it became very corporate. Then I went into another business that I had to start from scratch. I build it again, build an infrastructure. Then we had a currency issue where our vendors stopped paying us, so on and so forth, until I started our construction company. And this was the toughest one, because I started again from zero, an industry that requires a lot of capital, very capital intensive, credit intensive. You need leverage. And when I built it to a pretty decent size of give or take 100 million a year in revenues, from a one little bungalow that we invested $7,500 with, to get it to that level. And all of a sudden the financial crisis hits when I was way over leveraged. And that took us down, where at one point our net worth was negative market wise. If we were to sell all of our assets, we didn't have enough to pay our banks. Oh. So that has been the journey, where the most important point of this discussion is I never considered quitting. I never considered walking away and not continuing to attempt and try something else. That was a terrifying thought. Perhaps what some people see as a terrifying experience to embark on a new journey of entrepreneurship, to me, it was the opposite. The fear of not getting on with it and starting and moving at a fast pace to start something new was a terrifying thought. So I would immediately jump, start making phone calls, start calling my contacts, start seeing who's doing what, who needs something, and starting to put those pieces of the puzzle together. So my advice is get up, dust yourself off, and get back on the horse. Just give yourself a little time to think about what you did wrong and how you could have done better, but move on to the next experience in life. Life is short, and you can't spend it figuring out what went wrong for too long.
Well, how about mentally dealing with the fact that like you said, you've invested all this time in some businesses that didn't go anywhere. For me, it was less about the money and more about the feeling like I've wasted part of my life when you invest all this time in something and it doesn't work out, or you end up losing money. And like, man, I don't mind losing money because I know you can always make money again. But when I invest, a year or two in something that doesn't go anywhere, I feel like I lose, a couple of years of my life. And that's very intellectually, it's very hard to deal with. How like intellectually, how do you deal with failures? Like, does it get you, do you let yourself get down for a little bit and then say, okay, now it's time to get back on the horse? Or does it not really get you down because you think it's just, that is the life of an entrepreneur, ups and downs?
It never stops hurting. Those losses, you just learn to manage them. And eventually you start getting a little more philosophical about life. Those are the moments when you start getting very deep. But I have to admit that they're extremely difficult. This is a very interesting subject that you're touching on. Years ago, I read an article in some of my earlier failures where I invested, I don't know, 4 or 5 years of my life on a project where eventually the business didn't work. I lost all my money and I ended up back to zero, back to square one. That the equivalent of losing large sums of money in an important period of time is almost equivalent to losing a loved one. It's a very shocking, I would say an extremely shocking experience to most people, to the majority of humans, because you devoted a number of years of your life to a mission that did not succeed. And that impact is not only traumatic, but it can be tragic to most people. So it would be the equivalent of you going to college, getting your degree, working day in, day out, sacrificing, not having fun, not seeing your friends, compromising, focusing on studying, getting straight A's, devoting your life and your time to getting your degree. And when you walk up to the podium and walk over to get your diploma, the person handing it out to you tells you, I'm sorry, we made a mistake. You're going to have to start all over and go back 4 years. That doesn't exist in other areas other than entrepreneurship, where you can invest a number of years on a mission and then be pushed back as if none of your work and your energy and your effort and the time that you devoted meant anything. So it's very impacting. And to answer the question, how do you deal with it? At first, my first experience was shocking. I was depressed. I was depressed from losing everything that meant something to me. Eventually, I started snapping out of it. It took me some time to really understand that was life. I got deep, I got philosophical, I got spiritual. I began to accept my new reality. And if you can process that, this is who I am. All right, I suffered a little bit about it. I went through the motions. I went through the denial phase. Now it's time to come to terms with my new reality. What do I want to do? Do I want to stay in the suffering, or do I want to move to a new chapter and move on to a new chapter of my life? So my advice is, don't feel bad if it hurts, because it always does. I don't care who you are, whether you lost a few dollars or a business, a few months or a few years. The longer and the more intense the business was and the bigger the fall, the more it hurts. But none of us are exempt from that pain, from the suffering, from the experience, and from the depression that you're going to go through. It's okay. Feel it. What's not okay is to remain there.
Yes.
At some point, snap out of it and make a decision. Do I want to get back on that horse? And just like in relationships, just like with everything else in life, you break up with someone. Am I able and willing to put myself out there and try it again? Yes. The answer, if you have that personality, the answer is yes. So that kept happening to me, and that's how I dealt with it. But I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that it was easy and the next day I just snapped out of it and moved on. It was a process. Every time that something goes wrong, man, I don't sleep. It hurts. It hurts. And in every aspect of your life, it's a tough process, and you take your medicine and move on to the next chapter. But that's the only thing we can do. And if at some point, the other recommendation that I give is that if you go through those failures, it's a mistake to throw the towel and just go and become a mediocre version of yourself, because now you have every failure, as they say, gets you closer to success. Every failure gives you better opportunities, better probabilities, and puts you statistically in a stronger position to perhaps do better the next time. So why throw away that experience? Why not try it again? So you get back on the skateboard or whatever it is that you're doing, even if it's in a different industry, even if it's in another environment, but you don't just quit and waste that energy or that experience. And that's what I always would go back to. Hey, now I understand how to put a business together. I understand how to put the players together. I understand the needs of operating, running, starting, building, and developing a company. Why am I going to waste that? Let me try again. Lastly, particularly if you're in the earlier stages of your life, when you have time, when you have freedom, when you don't have personal overhead, when you don't have children or family to support, try it. Keep trying it. One of these attempts will work. It's as easy as that. But don't give up and say, hey, well, I tried, it didn't work. Let's just live less than optimum life for myself because that experience didn't work out. That's what I wouldn't recommend. You need to just keep going.
I love the idea of when you're young, you don't have responsibility. So that's the time to take these big risks, because it does get harder as you get older. You know, when you have a mortgage and you have a couple of mouths to feed and a wife sort of relying on your income and all these different things, it does become harder. But when you're young and you don't have much responsibility, that's the time to dream big and swing for the fences. And the worst that can happen is it doesn't work out. But I'd always rather, when there's all said and done at the end of my life, I always rather have an infinite amount of failures, but always be trying than just be satisfied with not even trying. I think that's such a good message. You know, we're both a bit older fathers. And I think when we talk to our kids, that's one of the messages that I really want to get across to my son is it's like the Michael Jordan quote. He says he's missed something like 10,000 shots in his career. But the reason is because he put himself out there the most. He might have had the most misses, but he also had the most successes because he was always putting himself out there. And I think that's such a good lesson. So many people now are scared of failure. And that's why for me, it's so refreshing to talk to people like you. Like you said, you've reached you've reached $1 million status in 4 different businesses. and it's been incredibly difficult. And even now you're having problems with these interest rates. But it's really refreshing to hear that, because it'll be easy for someone on the outside to look at you and say, you've just published a book on home building. You've got this incredible experience and track record. It's easy for Jose. It's hard for me, but it's easy for him because he's successful. And I think that's just such a refreshing message to get across, is it doesn't matter where you are in life, you all have problems. Well, we all have problems that we're dealing with.
Absolutely. You are correct. No one can avoid those obstacles, those setbacks, the adversity. My journey, a lot of people, like you said, may look at me and say, well, yeah, it happened quick. It happened easy. He had opportunities. No, it was the hardest thing. There were so many days when I wanted to walk away from business. It was unbearable. The stress, the sleepless nights, the endless days when you're just done and your brain wants to explode, but you won't quit because there's more to do. And another day and another day, and Saturdays and Sundays and mornings and nights, and walking away from every distraction and focusing on that mission and knowing that you're going to get there. It has to come from your from your inner self, almost mind over matter. But it's not easy. Whoever thinks that if it doesn't happen right away, it's not for me, is wrong. It's going to be extremely difficult, just like any other achievement in life, whether it's in business, in personal, in sports, in science. Everything takes effort. Everything takes a tremendous amount of sacrifice. And you're right. The younger you understand it, the more time you have. Because as you get older, although there are still ways of living your dreams and taking chances, but absolutely gets difficult, much more difficult, because now there's other people counting on you. And now you are gambling a little bit more with other people's lives, the people that need you, the people that depend on you now. But the irony is that when we're young, it doesn't it doesn't click so fast. We want to have fun. We want to travel. We want to live. When we don't understand that, hey, I can do all that once I become financially free. And this is the time when I have no baggage and I can truly take care of business. So not many young people think that way. And the ones that do have statistically much better chances.
Jose, when you were talking about all the things you went through as a 4-year-old, and like you said, the next decade, I got to be honest, my heart really went out to you. Like the young Jose, like just thinking about it. I think about my son who's nearly 4, and just you're so innocent at that age, and you had, like you said, your childhood was kind of ripped away from you, but it's just so interesting now with both parents, and you now you look back and you develop so much of your character through that tragedy. But as a parent, I'm sure both of us, we're trying to we're trying to protect our kids and keep them in this cocoon of love, But how do you think about that when you're raising your kids, with knowing that they're going to get so much out of hardships? But of course, as a parent, the natural inclination is to protect them from the world, So how do you kind of resolve those two things? And how do you think you can teach your kids to get the, resilience that's going to set them up well for life without, putting them through the horrors that you went through?
There is no right answer for that. Every parent acts different. I'm not going to lie to you and say that my experience allowed me to be stronger in how I raise my kids. I'm still as protective, perhaps even more, because of what I've been through.
Yes.
So there are two aspects of this. One is the fact that the world has changed a lot. Although I think that back when we were growing up, the world appeared safer. There was just not the same amount of media. There were similar dangers. There were similar problems. Perhaps the world has gotten a little bit scarier nowadays. We could play on the streets. By the time I was my kid's age, I was already on public transportation. I could take the bus and go to the mall, or in the morning, go out and play with my kids. I mean, with my kid friends, and my parents would just tell me, "Hey, come back when before it's dark." And this is, when you're 7, 8 years of age. You could do that back then. You can't do that today. The world has changed. So we have to adapt and understand today's dangers, shootings, kidnappings, robbery, all the cars, drunk driving, all of these things, all of these, the drugs, all of those things that have become perhaps a more dangerous world. We have to take those into account. So my theory is I have to give them monitored freedom. I give them the freedom to do things that perhaps give them the autonomy, give them the ability to develop their personalities and to understand how to interact with the world, but in a protected environment. That's my particular theory. I've been through so much that I'm not only looking out to protect them. Ironically, I'm looking out to protect me because I couldn't bear the thought of making a mistake and not protecting them the way that I should. So I am an overprotector because of my circumstances. Instead of being more free, oh, they'll survive. No, I think I went the other way where I'm a little more protective. But at the same time, the other aspect is technology. For example, in my household, we have a lot of rules. No social media, no telephones until a certain age. We're not going to expose them. They have to be social. They have to be friends with other kids. They have to go outside and play. They have to do all these other activities that a lot of kids are nowadays not doing. We take them to restaurants. They have to be social. They have to sit at a restaurant and know how to act and how to interact with others. So yes, some of those you have to incorporate, but ultimately, I do believe that you have to protect them from the current environment that we're living in.
That's beautiful. Well, Jose, we don't have too much longer. I'd love to just give you the last word. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the book you just published on home building and, your final thoughts before we wrap up. And of course, I'll put links in the show notes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, The Business of Home Building is a book that I've been wanting to write for so long, and I'm not in the literary aspect. I'm not a writer. I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories about personal experiences just as much as business and entrepreneurship. But I began with this book because I've devoted so many years to this industry. I plan to write it. I'm finishing my second book, which is about land speculating, land investing, land development. And then I'm going to continue with subsequent books because I'm truly enjoying the process of putting my thoughts down on paper and communicating some of these experiences. But this first book was devoted to an industry that I've invested a quarter of a century, 25 years or so, to building homes. But the focus of this book is not how to build a home. It's how to build the business that builds the homes. So it's about the entrepreneurial, the business aspects of how to start a business, how to build a business, how to operate it, the pros, the cons, the dangers, some of the things that you need to look out for. And it gives you a lot of advice as to what are some of the things that can help you organize your thoughts while starting a business, not just in residential construction, but in construction or in any other type of industry. It has a lot of similarities. Businesses and industries share a lot of things in common, from your management, from your structure, from the sequence of events, from the different departments and the people that you need to put together, how to put a team together, how to understand your concept, your mission, your vision, your strategy, how to differentiate yourself, how to market your product, so on and so forth. So this book tells you and gives you a lot of very, very tangible ideas in a sequence of events of aspects that need to be incorporated and thought of when you're starting and building a business that can help you at the very least know what they are and not embark on this journey of starting and building a business and later go, oh my God, I didn't think about this. I didn't think about that. We didn't plan for the other. we could have gone this way, we could have gone that way. So I think this book will be very helpful, not just for this industry, but for every entrepreneur out there. It has a lot of stories. It might be a subject that seems very limited, but it's very open, and it's full of stories, and I think that it's written in a fun way that people might enjoy it.
Oh, I read about a quarter of it last night. It's very, very readable. And you like you said, you're a great storyteller. So honestly, Jose, it was such a pleasure. I find your story so inspiring. Like you said, you've had so many ups and downs, and it hurts when one of your babies, one of your businesses doesn't work out, but you just keep on going. And if there's one lesson just to end on, it's this perseverance is so important. We can all persevere more. We can all put more determination and grit into trying to get success in life. And I think there's very few times where that's not going to pay off. So that's just such a beautiful lesson that you've reminded me of. And you're an incredible man. So thank you so much for sharing your story.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And likewise, congratulations on your success. I try to give myself rules when it's time also to invest a little bit in working hard, in having fun, and even when it's time to really rest. And so as long as you have your system and you follow it, it works. So anyway, thank you so much for the invitation. It's been great being here with you.
Likewise, Jose. Thank you.